A little later this morning, people will be leaving churches all over. Some people say the sermon actually starts in the parking lot. Something starts in the parking lot. Very often, people are saying things like this: I didn't get much out of the service today. Remind me not to come when she's speaking. I didn't get anything out of it. The music just didn't do much for me. This is what we hear sometimes because we come to church, come to our worship services with more of a consumer mindset. Like we go to the grocery store or something, that we're supposed to get a basket full after we come out. Now, to be honest with you, I love it if you get something out of the service. I'm sure Robert loves it if you get something out of the music. But if you come here with that as your only expectation, then you're likely to be disappointed many times. Because worship is more than getting. A big part of worship is giving and participating. So I've been thinking a lot about worship and reading a lot about worship for the last couple of weeks. And I've gathered some ideas from my thinking and reading. Now, I call these some gathered ideas and not some truths, because Rudy Giuliani told me that truth is not truth. And I think I disagree with him when it comes to saying somebody didn't say something that they're on videotape saying, maybe. But I think with something like what is worship, he may be right, because we do have differing perceptions of some of these concepts. So I'm calling these, instead of some truths that I'm sharing, some gathered ideas that I shared from my readings about worship. I did look up the etymology. Initially, worship was a noun, and it meant that which is worthy. But we don't use it much as a noun anymore. We're more likely to use it as a verb, or even sometimes as an adjective. And probably we usually use it as a verb when we giving honor to, or paying attention to, or celebrating that which we consider as worthy. And of course, we as Unitarian Universalists, we have different ideas about what we consider as worthy sometimes, but we worship that which we consider to be worthy. Here are some ideas I gathered from some other readings. One, worship means to turn our thoughts, feelings, and actions to that which is considered worthy, honorable, greater than ourselves. Many folks refer to this higher power as God. Others use other names to acknowledge what they are worshiping. Some see this power as external to them, others as internal, and others as everywhere or not in any place at all. But I wondered, well, what does it mean to Unitarian Universalists? So on our listserv, which many of you are members of, how many of you are on our listserv? Just raise your hand. Not everybody, so we can get you on there. But I also put it on Facebook and our worship. I asked the questions and to see if you would tell me what worship meant to you. I didn't have many responses, but I think some of the responses I got are pretty representative of what some of our folks feel. So what does worship mean to you? One member said, it means acknowledging that there is a power greater than ourselves who created the world where we live. Another member said, it means service of devotion, coming together with people of similar values and meeting in a religious home for a formalized worship towards a greater power. And another said, to worship is to feel and show wonder and appreciation for existence and blessings, and to share all of this by giving back. I also asked, what or who do you worship? The responses I got, I worship one God who has a number of names and no gender. Another said, a greater power that gives individuals the freedom to choose how to live their lives. A third said, who or what I worship is the spirit of life and love, whom I perceive as the great goddess. The third thing I asked was, where and how do you worship? I'm made more aware of worship when I'm in a spiritual setting, such as a church or synagogue. That is usually where we hear people use the word, at least, right? In a church on Sunday morning with the leadership of a minister and in a congregation of others seeking to worship in a similar manner, such as with music, meditation, and a message. That's pretty common for what many people think of as worship because that's where we use the word. This person said, though, I worship daily at home, plus specifically on Sabbaths with ritual and dance. I think right now there's a special moon, and some people are aware of that, and if you follow those practices, you know, those are the times that you really bring worship to the forefront. Now, there was one person that answered with an unusual way. Instead of giving me the answers to the 3 questions, you know, some people just won't do what you ask them to do. This person says, go to YouTube and see what George Carlin says about sun worship. Okay. So I did. I thought, oh, this may be something I can play the YouTube like I do some videos. I can play it at church. No. I can't play the George Carlin video for you at church about sun worship. But I do have a couple of quotes that I can share with you, and I'll do my best George Carlin imitation. He said, I've begun worshiping the sun for a number of reasons. First of all, unlike some other gods I could mention, I can see the sun. It's there for me every day, and the things it brings me are quite apparent all the time. Heat, light, food, and a lovely day. There's no mystery. No one asks for money. I don't have to dress up, and there's no boring pageantry. And interestingly enough, I have found that the prayers I offer to the sun and the prayers I formerly offered to God are all answered about the same 50% rate. Now, that's one quote I found from George Carlin from an earlier time when he said he would pray to the sun god or pray to the sun and get about the same responses as he did when he formerly prayed to God. Later, he changed his mind, okay, like we do sometimes he specifically changed his mind about praying. This was a later quote. Sun worship is fairly simple. There's no mystery, no miracles, no pageantry, and no one asks for money, and there are no songs to learn, and we don't have a special building where we all have to gather once a week to compare clothing. And the best thing about the sun, it never tells me I'm unworthy. Doesn't tell me I'm a bad person who needs to be saved. Hasn't said an unkind word. Treats me fine. So I worship the sun. But I don't pray to the sun. Know why? I wouldn't presume on our friendship. It's not polite. So George Carlin quit praying to the sun, if he ever did. Someone must have asked him one time, well, who do you pray to? And he told them. He said, here's who I pray to. Joe Pesci. Because I think he's a good actor, and I think Joe can get things done. All right. Well, I didn't come to share with you mainly about George Carlin today. I came to explore the words of Jacob Trapp. Now, I was unable to find out a whole lot about Jacob Trapp. I do know he lived from 1899 to 1992. I know he was a Unitarian Universalist minister, but I can't tell you a lot about his life. But I do know the words he wrote. He wrote meditations and prayers, 4 of which are in our hymnal. He wrote a book of those that UUA used to sell. I don't know if they still do. So he left with us, and I do have kind of who he is. And one of my favorites is the one called To Worship. And that's why I selected that one to emphasize today and to explore with you today. I felt a kindred spirit with him. I didn't know much about him, but I kind of know a little about Jacob Trapp from what he has written. So I want to share with you those words and share with you some of my thoughts about that as we explore Jacob Trapp's reading that's in the back of our hymnal, which many consider our sacred text, if we have one. It's called To Worship. He begins with these words. To worship is to stand in awe under a heaven of stars, before a flower, a leaf in sunlight, or a grain of sand. That's to worship. I found this picture of starlight. And, you know, usually when we look at stars, a lot of pictures are this way, you know, with these stars with all these points and things. But I used to wonder, why is that like that? Because when I would look up at the stars, I just saw circles of light. Is that what you see? Well, you just wait. Because when you get older and get cataracts, you'll see these stars. Any of you know what I'm talking about? If you don't, you just wait. When you get the cataracts and before they're big enough to remove them, these are the stars you see. All these points. I'm serious. You see these stars. I always wonder, why do people think that they have these points? Well, they had cataracts. You know, and they saw the points. Yeah, that's where the star gets its points. But to be in a place, especially like those of us that go up to the mountain for either Women's Spirit, I go up there for the ministers' meet, somewhere where there are not a lot of city lights on. If you can go find a place like that and look up at the stars, that is to worship. Also, other beauty in the world. He says, to worship is to be silent, receptive, before a tree astir with the wind or the passing shadow of a cloud. To be silent. Listen. We are so fortunate here in Southeast Georgia to have beautiful pine trees that we can hear the wind as it goes through the pine trees. Other parts of the country sometimes they don't have trees that you can hear the wind going through. So sometimes we have to recognize the blessing, along with the gnats, that we can hear the wind in the trees and we can worship there. He says to worship is to work with dedication and with skill. It is to pause from work and listen to a strain of music. Have you ever thought about your work as worshiping? Now, if you have a kind of work that you love with a passion and are passionate about, some things like that, then you know you're worshiping when you work. But sometimes some of our work doesn't feel that way. Sometimes it's more mundane. How can you worship even in the mundane work that you need to do? Well, I turn to one of my prophets, Tom Robbins, and his book, which is a sacred text for me, Skinny Legs and All. And Tom, in this book, tells about an Arab guy named Abu, who's out of work. He's very well educated, but he doesn't have a job. He's in Chicago, and he has a cousin that has a restaurant. So he asked the cousin, can I come to work for you? And the cousin says, I happen to have a position open. Well, he's thinking, I'm an Ivy League graduate. I'll probably be the maitre d' at least or something, in this job at the restaurant. But when he gets there, the cousin points to the kitchen and points to a high thing of dirty dishes and said, this is the job I have for you, washing the dishes. Tom Robbins goes on to say, for many, just to contemplate those torrid waters with their roiling foams, gobs of goop, organic effluvia, and hazardous mines of metal and glass would be the beginning of a descent into hell, a hell devised by Julia Child to punish Colonel Sanders. Indeed, the first few times that Roland Abu Hadi stared into that blowhole of a sink, he saw the pitiless orbs of Satan staring back, and a sinister shock shook his stomach. He heard asbestos ghouls chuckle and piss. Holding his breath, closing his eyes, he plunged his hands into the broth and instantly passed out. It was the most wonderful thing that ever happened to him. Because what happened, even though he passed out that first time, he learned to appreciate dishwashing. And he had his hands under the warm water, and he would start to think about each dish and how it started off crusty or dirty, and he could rub it around and make cleanse with it and rinse it off. A ritual with every dish he did. And it became, for him, a spiritual practice. So much so that later when he opened his own restaurant with his Jewish partner that was across the street from the United Nations, he told them not to put in a dishwasher, that he wanted to wash every dish. It was that important to him. He's not the only one that sees dishwashing as a spiritual practice. Also, Thich Nhat Hanh. He says, to my mind, the idea that doing dishes is unpleasant can occur only when you aren't doing them. Once you stand in front of the sink with your sleeves rolled up and your hands in the warm water, it really isn't so bad. I enjoy taking my time with each dish, being fully aware of the dish, the water, each movement of my hand. Every bowl I wash, each poem I compose is a miracle, and each has exactly the same value. Now, where can you come to hear of the spiritual practice of dishwashing by Tom Robbins and Thich Nhat Hanh but a UU church? Okay. But dishwashing, after I read that passage by Tom Robbins and heard about that, I never thought about dishwashing the same way again. Yeah. And now I see Thich Nhat Hanh feels the same way. So I'm doubly energized now. Jacob Trapp said, to worship is to sing with the singing beauty of the earth. Please join me. He also says, it is listening through a storm to the still small voice within. When I saw those words, at first I thought Trapp was referring to the story in Hebrew scriptures that you may remember about Elijah. Elijah's on the mountaintop and he's looking for a word from God. And a storm came, but he did not hear from God. An earthquake came. He did not hear. The rains, the winds, he did not hear from God. And then there was a still small voice, and he heard God in just a still small voice. But when I looked at Jacob Trapp's words, that's not what he said. He said, it is listening through a storm while the storm's going on to that still small voice. Not when it's all over, but when the storm is going on. And I thought about that and I thought, oh yes, I have learned many divine lessons in the storms of my life. In fact, I have probably learned more during the storms of my life than when it's restful and peaceful. You may be the same. If you'll listen, there are divine lessons in the storms of your life. Trapp says, worship is a loneliness seeking communion. It is a thirsty land crying out for rain. It's not always about beauty and celebration. Sometimes our worship is a lamentation. And instead of singing for the beauty of the earth, we may sing something like this. Join me. Sometimes I feel like a mother's child. Sometimes I feel like a mother's child. Sometimes I feel like a mother's child. Away from home. Trapp says that worship is a kindred fire within our hearts, a kindred fire, one that's related to something, to others, to the divine. Now, in our worship services here, after we light the chalice and sing, "Rise up, O flame," and look at that light, I ask you to honor the light within you and the light within others by speaking to those nearby. That's that kindred fire within our hearts. Sometimes that is expressed through this word, namaste. The spirit within me recognizes or sees or honors the spirit within you. We often use this word at meditation times. If you take yoga from Inga, and maybe Fred does the same, we end each of our yoga sessions with the words namaste. It also moves through deeds of kindness and through acts of love. Do you think of yourself as worshiping when you do something kind or are kind to someone or show love to someone? I'm reading a book with some folks at my other congregation on kindness. I would share with you the author, but I forgot. But the book is about being kind. And we were reading a chapter the other day that said that when we are aware of beauty, when we take time to be aware of beauty, it will help us to be kinder to people. Did you notice how kind Janice Cawthorn was this morning when you came in? She was smiling. She was greeting us with kindness. Not that she doesn't always, but it seemed especially this morning that she really was. And then I found out why. She happened this morning to be able to see that little butterfly just as it was coming out of the cocoon. And guess what? She had her phone with her and she captured a picture. So you can see that too, and she can remember it later. When we take time, though, to see the beauty, it somehow evolves in us more of a spirit of kindness. And we're kinder to people. So don't feel guilty about taking some time to see some beauty. It's going to make you a kinder person. So we worship through deeds of kindness and through the acts of love. Kindness matters. In our world today, it's pretty hard to see sometimes when you're looking at social media or other kinds of things. But kindness matters. Jacob Trapp said, worship is the mystery within us, reaching out to the mystery beyond. Now, we here at the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Statesboro like to find out things. We say to question. To question is the answer. To question is part of our spiritual practice. We're always asking why, who, what, where. We recognize that as valuable. And we love it when we can find an answer. But shouldn't we also love the answers we don't find? The mystery some things are. That some things, even with all we know, are still a mystery, and to hold that as precious to us. The more I know that I don't know. Isn't that the way it is? So the mystery is there no matter how much we learn. And that is worship, having that mystery and reaching out to the mystery. He says it is an inarticulate silence, yearning to speak. Something within us that wants to speak about something but cannot. Sometimes we say, there are no words to express what I feel. No words. This happened to me twice this week. Now, those of you who know me know that I'm not a crying person. I don't cry easily at all. I didn't cry when my daddy died. I kept on thinking, well, I'll probably cry tomorrow. I never cried. Maybe that was because he had Alzheimer's and the dad that I knew had long been gone. I don't know. But I never cried, and I don't cry much. But this week, early in the week, I was walking, and on my walk, it just happened the weather was nice at that time. I won't walk when it's not. I go early or late, But the weather was nice. There was a breeze blowing. There were so many beautiful things around me. And I was caught in one of those moments that I cannot share with you now. I don't have words to share what I was experiencing. And tears started coming down my face. And I know you've had times like that as well. It's just such a moment that you cry. Tears of joy, of happiness that you can't express another way. So the tears come. We say we laugh, we cry. That's what we do here at UU sometimes. There was another time, Friday night, Greg and I, on Friday afternoon, let me go early so we can get cheap rate, you know. Of course, we can get senior rate too. But we went at 5 o'clock to see, Black Klansman. And if you haven't seen it, please go, please go. So I'm watching that movie, and I can very well identify it, even though the setting was Colorado Springs, but it was set in the early 70s, late 60s, early 70s, which was when I was a very young adult. And so many of the things that I saw in that movie were real to me. It resonated with me of what was happening. But it was history. It was back in the back, it resonated. Now, by the end of the movie, though, after I'd watched that whole movie, and I will not spoil it to you by telling you exactly what all went on in the movie, but by the end of the movie, as the movie ended, I couldn't get up out of my seat. I sat there, and I just started crying. Greg was sitting more toward the aisle, so he was ordering up and out. Didn't realize I didn't follow him. I couldn't get up. I was just weeping, and it wasn't those tears of joy. There were other tears. I couldn't express it, but I was just crying. I mean, I was like boo-hoo crying. Greg had to come in and get me and help me back out to the car. Now, I believe I was worshiping then too. Your worship doesn't just come at those moments of joy. Your worship comes at other times too, when sometimes you can't even express what is happening, express your thoughts, but you are worshiping. Jacob Trapp's last words say that worship is the window of the moment open to the sky of the eternal. The window of the moment open to the sky of the eternal. Paying attention to that moment, I'd like for you to read the whole thing with me in closing. I'll read the plain Jane, you read the bold italics. To worship is to stand in awe under a heaven of stars before a flower, a leaf in sunlight, or a grain of sand.
To worship is to be silent, receptive before a tree stirred with the wind, or the passing shadow of a cloud.
To worship is to work with dedication and with skill. It is to pause from work and listen to a strain of music.
To worship is to sing with the singing beauty of the earth. It is to listen through the storm to the still small voice within.
Worship is loneliness seeking communion. It is a thirsty land crying out for rain.
Worship is kindred fire within our hearts. It moves through deeds of kindness and through acts of love.
Worship is the mystery within us, reaching out to the mystery beyond.
It is an inarticulate silence yearning to speak. It is the window of the moment open to the sky of the eternal.
I believe if Jacob Trapp was alive today in our modern culture of using the modern vernacular, he may say this. To worship is staying woke to that which is worthy. I appreciate you all staying woke during this message. I hope that it was worthy. Thanks for letting me share it.